Minecraft horror story, The Tall Steve. Steve saw the taller version of himself standing on the village roof at sunrise. At first, he thought June had placed an armor stand there as a joke. The figure wore a blue shirt and purple trousers. Its square head faced the fields, and its arms hung at its sides. Morning fog covered its legs below the knees. Then it turned toward Steve. It was at least 5 blocks tall. The arms were so long that its black hands touched the roof. Its face had 2 empty eye holes and a white smile cut across it. For 1 second, the pale light made every tooth clear. Steve raised his bow. The tall figure stepped backward and dropped behind the house. Steve ran between the farms. Snow broke under his boots. The village sat in a cold spruce forest, with a frozen river on one side and a mountain on the other. He and his friends had spent weeks repairing it. Every empty house had a bed. Lanterns lit every path. A stone wall protected the farms from zombies. When Steve reached the house, nothing stood behind it. There were no tracks in the snow. He climbed to the roof and found one thing beside the chimney. A wooden sign lay flat against the stone. 2 words had been scratched into it. "Good morning." "Steve?" June called from the path. He looked down. June and Cole stood beside the village bell. June carried a stack of roof blocks. Cole held an empty map. Both stared at the bow in Steve's hand. "Did one of you put this here?" Steve asked. June climbed up and read the sign. "No." Cole looked across the roofs. "What did you see?" Steve told them. Cole laughed until he saw Steve's face. A tall Steve? "It looked like me from far away." "And close?" June asked. Steve looked at the sign again. "Close. It looked like something wearing me." They searched the village until noon. Every door was locked. The iron golem walked its normal path. A snow golem still stood on the north tower, throwing snowballs at a spider trapped outside the wall. Nothing seemed wrong. The only strange mark was found in the wheat field. A strip of crops had been pressed flat from the outer fence to the village well. The path was too narrow for a ravager and too straight for any animal. Cole broke the dirt beside the well. A long black hair was caught between 2 blocks. It was longer than a bowstring and stiff like wire. "That did not come from Steve," June said. They put it in a glass bottle. The hair curled toward Steve whenever he moved. At sunset, the iron golem stopped beside the north gate. Its head turned toward the spruce forest. It did not move again for several minutes. Steve joined it on the path. "What do you see?" A voice answered from outside the wall. "What do you see?" It was Steve's voice. The iron golem rushed through the gate. Snow flew under its heavy feet. Steve, June, and Cole climbed the tower. Between the spruce trees, a blue shirt moved away from them. The golem followed. The voice called again. "This way." The golem vanished into the dark. For a while they heard trees breaking. Then came 3 hard hits. After that, the forest was silent. They found the golem the next morning. Its iron body had been pulled apart and arranged in the shape of a player. The legs pointed toward the village. A carved pumpkin rested where its head should have been. Someone had cut a smile into the pumpkin. Cole stopped laughing about the tall Steve. June wanted to move before night. Steve agreed, but their horses were gone. Every lead in the stable had been cut. Fresh tracks crossed the snow outside the rear wall. 3 horses had walked into the woods in a neat line. Beside their tracks ran a 4th set of marks. They looked like player footprints, but the steps were 3 blocks apart. Steve followed the prints to the first line of spruce trees. June and Cole stayed close behind him. The horse tracks continued into the forest, but the long player marks stopped beside a stump. The stump was not real. Someone had placed spruce slabs around an open shaft and covered them with snow. Steve pushed the false top aside. A ladder dropped beneath the roots. The horses had not gone down it, but pieces of cut lead hung from the rungs. Cole lowered a lantern. A room appeared 10 blocks below. "That was not here when we built the wall," June said. Steve climbed down first. The room was made from blocks taken from the village. One wall used church stone, another used planks from the stable. 3 stalls stood in the center, each holding a wooden shape built to the size of a horse. The missing saddles had been placed on them. Each wooden horse had Steve's face carved into its head. June found a line of maps on the far wall. They showed the village from above. New marks had been added each day. One map showed where Steve mined, another showed Cole walking beyond the farms, a third showed June working alone on the north roof. The creature had chosen times when only one of them could see it. On a table lay 3 name tags: Steve, June, Cole. The tag with Steve's name was dark and worn, as if it had been handled many times. The other 2 were new. Cole backed toward the ladder. "It is naming us." A horse whinnied in the wall. Steve broke the block where the sound came from. Behind it was a narrow viewing space that ran toward the village. Small holes opened under the stable, the meeting hall, and the path near the bell. The tall Steve had watched their feet from below. Far along the space, something moved. Steve raised the lantern. A normal Steve crawled toward them on hands and knees. It wore his skin and carried no weapon. Its face looked tired. "Help me," it said. "I cannot stand." Cole reached for his crossbow. The copy stopped. "It broke my legs." Steve looked at the space. It was only 1 block high. A real player would have to crawl slowly. The copy moved without its shoulders touching either side. "Where are the horses?" June asked. The copy smiled. Its arms shot forward. Steve cut one hand. June slammed a stone block into the viewing hole. Long fingers curled around the block before the opening closed. The wall shook. The creature called from the other side in the voice of each horse, one after another. Cole poured water through a crack. Steam rose. The fingers released the stone. They climbed out and filled the shaft with snow and gravel. Steve kept the 3 name tags. If the creature collected names like tools, he wanted to know what it planned to do with them. Before returning to the village, they followed the horse tracks another 50 blocks. The prince reached a clearing and stopped around a spruce tree. All 3 horses hung high in the branches, still alive, tied in leads. Their legs kicked above the snow. The tall Steve had placed them where the friends could see but not easily reach. Steve built upward. As he cut the first lead, his own voice called from the ground. "Jump, I will catch you." No one stood below. They lowered the horses with water and rode them back, but one animal would no longer go near Steve. It pulled against the lead and stared over his shoulder. When Steve turned, nothing was there. At the village gate, June stopped. Someone had put the carved pumpkin back on the iron golem's broken body. The pieces now stood upright beside the wall, held together with dark hair. It looked like a tall, thin guard. As the friends passed, The pumpkin head turned. Steve fired an arrow. The false golem fell apart. From beneath the iron blocks, his own voice whispered, "Good shot." The friends packed food, tools, and beds. They would leave on foot at dawn and follow the frozen river toward a plains village Cole had marked months before. Until then, they stayed inside the meeting hall with every lantern burning. Night covered the windows. Wind pushed loose snow against the door. Normal mobs gathered outside the wall. Skeleton arrows struck stone. A zombie beat on a distant house. Near midnight, Steve heard mining below the floor. One block broke. A pause followed. Then another block broke closer to the center of the room. June put her hand on the bell rope. Cole aimed a crossbow at the floor. The mining stopped under Steve's boots. His voice came through the planks. "Do not ring the bell." June pulled the rope. The village bell sounded once. Every zombie outside stopped hitting the walls. The skeletons lowered their bows. For a few seconds, no mob made a sound. Then all of them turned toward the meeting hall. The front door shook under a heavy blow. "Open it," Steve's voice said from below. "Let me in." Another Steve answered from the roof. "Do not let it inside." A third voice came from the well. "I am still down here." The same voice spoke from every side of the building, each copy using a different fear. June pulled a lever. Iron shutters closed over the windows. Cole placed obsidian over the door. Steve watched the floor. A black finger slid between two planks. It bent upward, felt along the wood, and touched Steve's boot. He drove his sword down. The finger vanished. Something moved through the crawl space with a fast scrape, crossed the room, and climbed inside the wall. The mining began above them. Steve looked up just as a square of roof disappeared. The tall Steve stared through the hole. Its head filled the gap. The eyes were deep and pale at the bottom. Its smile opened until the lower jaw touched the roof tiles. "Good morning," it said. June fired her crossbow. The bolt entered one eye. The creature pulled away without a cry. Steve placed blocks over the hole. Cole poured water across the roof from a bucket. Dark smoke slipped past the edges, and a long shape jumped to the next house. The zombies began moving again. They spent the rest of the night listening to the tall Steve walk across the roofs. It repeated simple things Steve had said during the day. Sometimes it copied his breathing. Sometimes it made the sound of his sword striking the floor. Once it copied the noise of the iron golem being torn apart. Just before sunrise, the creature spoke in a voice none of them knew. "I was Steve first." Then it left. At dawn, the snow around the village was covered in tracks. All of them began at the meeting hall. None led into the forest. The tall Steve had not entered from outside during the night. It had already been beneath them. They opened the floor and found a shaft where solid stone had been the day before. It dropped 20 blocks into a tunnel. The walls were smooth and dark hairs hung from the ceiling. One hair still moved. June touched it with a torch. It burned at once, giving off the smell of rotten leaves. "We are leaving now," Cole said. They crossed the north bridge as the sun rose above the mountain. Steve carried food and potions. June carried redstone parts. Cole carried maps and an ender chest. None of them looked back until they reached the first bend in the frozen river. The village stood quiet behind them. On the north tower, The snow golem waved both arms. Then it removed its pumpkin. Under the pumpkin was Steve's smiling face. The body unfolded. Long legs rose behind the wall. The tall Steve stepped over the tower and dropped onto the ice. "Run," Steve said. The creature repeated the word in June's voice. They sprinted along the river. The tall Steve did not chase at first. It walked. Each long step carried it several blocks. Its arms swung beside the trees. When Steve looked back, it stopped and covered its face. When he turned forward, the steps began again. "It moves when we look away," June said. They took turns watching it. Steve ran backward with his bow ready. Then June watched while he drank food. Cole kept the map open and led them toward a narrow pass. The creature stayed 100 blocks behind them. It never came closer while someone looked at it. Then the snow began. White flakes filled the air, hiding the trees and river. The tall Steve became a dark line in the storm. Steve could not tell if it moved. One blink showed it far away. The next showed it beside a spruce tree much closer. Cole fired a firework into the sky. Red lights spread through the snow. The river behind them was empty. "Where did it go?" he asked. Steve heard his own whisper beside Cole. "Here." The tall Steve became visible between them. Its body had been hidden for only a few seconds, but that was enough. One long hand seized Cole's pack. Steve struck the wrist. June placed a lava bucket on the ice. The heat broke the frozen river. Water pulled the creature down. It released Cole and screamed with a sound made from many animal cries. Black steam covered its face. Steve, June, and Cole reached the riverbank. The tall Steve climbed from the water behind them. Its wet arms stretched even farther, and its fingers cut lines through the snow. Fire from the lava spread across its shirt, but the creature rolled under a one-block gap in the bank and vanished into the trees. They did not stop until the village disappeared behind the storm. The frozen river narrowed as night returned. Steep banks rose on both sides, forcing the friends to stay on the ice. The horses slowed, their breath made white clouds, and their hooves slipped on the frozen surface. Cole checked the map. A small fishing hut should have stood near the next bend. They found it before full dark, but the door had been built 3 blocks higher than normal. The roof leaned at a strange angle. Every part looked stretched upward. "It built this," Steve said. The tall Steve had copied the hut after seeing it, but it had used its own body as the measure. The table inside reached Steve's shoulders. The bed was 4 blocks long. A furnace sat too high to open without jumping. June searched the chest. It held cooked fish, 3 snowballs, and one of Bran's old signs. The words had almost faded. "If the house is too tall, it is already inside." The door shut behind them. Steve heard long fingers close around the handle from outside. The roof creaked. Something heavy crawled across it. Cole broke the rear wall, but beyond the planks was solid packed snow. The creature had buried the hut after they entered. June placed redstone torches around the room. The weak red light showed dark hairs hanging from cracks in the high ceiling. There were hundreds. They swayed even though the air was still. Steve touched one with his sword. Every hair pulled tight. The tall Steve lifted the whole roof. Snow fell through the opening. A giant black hand reached down. Steve rolled under the table. Cole fired upward. June threw the 3 snowballs in different directions. 2 fell back to the floor. The third stopped against something invisible beside the furnace. There were two parts of the creature in the hut. Steve struck the white mark. The invisible shape became the tall Steve's head, separated from the body above by a neck hidden in the wall. The creature had wrapped itself around the whole building. One arm held the roof, the other came through the floor. Its body lay behind the furnace, folded into a space too small for it. The smile opened at the level of Steve's chest. June poured her water bucket into the furnace gap. The tall Steve unfolded in a violent rush. Walls broke outward. Coal was thrown onto the ice. Steve grabbed June as the roof dropped. They escaped through the broken side and reached the horses. The tall Steve rose from the wreck behind them, straightening one section at a time. When it stood in full, its head reached above the spruce tops. The body was not only long, it had become longer since the village. Dark roots hanging from its back pulled blocks from the hut and pressed them into its skin. Wood, snow, and stone vanished under the torn blue shirt. The creature grew by using the things it copied. "Do not let it reach another building," June said. They rode onto the river. The tall Steve followed from the bank. It placed its feet on opposite sides of the frozen water and walked over them like a bridge. Steve looked back to keep it still. Cole guided Steve's horse by the lead. The storm became thicker. Snow covered the creature's face, but the smile remained visible. Then a bell rang ahead. A warm lantern appeared through the white air. Beside it stood June, waving from a normal fishing hut. The real June rode at Steve's side. The copy ahead called, "This shelter is safe." Cole turned his horse toward it before he saw the real June. Steve caught his lead. The copy's face changed, its mouth opened, and the lantern went dark. More warm lights appeared along both banks. Each showed a small house and one of the friends waiting beside it. The tall Steve had placed lanterns before the storm and built flat fronts that looked like shelters from the river. Behind every door was only a hole descending into black stone. They rode between the false homes while their copied voices called from both sides. "Food is here. The horses need rest. I found the map." Steve watched the tall Steve behind them. It stayed still whenever he could see it. The copied people ahead moved only when Cole or June looked away. Some were armor stands pulled by dark threads. Others vanished when snow touched them. The whole river had become a trap made from familiar shapes. One horse stepped on a hidden pressure plate. Packed ice broke beneath it. Cole and the animal fell into the water. Long black hands rose from under the frozen surface. Steve jumped down and threw a lead. June poured lava across the hole. Steam filled the river. The hands released Cole, but something pulled the horse into the dark. Its last cry came back from every false house. Cole climbed out. It was waiting under the ice. The tall Steve behind them was gone again. They abandoned the remaining horses and climbed the left bank. Steve placed fire behind them, burning the false house fronts. Tall shadows moved through the steam, but snowballs showed only empty air. Near dawn, they found a natural cave above the river. Steve checked every wall and gap. June covered the entrance with clear ice so they could see anything outside. Cole placed powdered snow across the floor. Any invisible foot would leave a hole. They rested in turns. During Steve's watch, one trail of holes appeared in the powdered snow. It began beside Cole, crossed the cave, and ended at Steve's feet. No door had opened, no wall had broken. Steve looked at Cole. A long black hair stuck out from under his coat. Steve pulled it. The hair was tied around one of the name tags from the hidden room. Cole. The tall Steve had placed it on him during the river attack. When Steve cut the hair, a whisper left Cole's sleeping mouth. "I know where you sleep." Cole woke with no memory of speaking. They burned the name tag, then burned the tags for Steve and June as well. From outside the clear ice, the tall Steve screamed in 3 voices. It had been using the tags to follow them. The scream started an avalanche. Snow rolled from the slope above the cave. The clear ice cracked. Steve, June, and Cole ran through a rear tunnel as the entrance disappeared. The tunnel opened beside the abandoned igloo just as the sky grew light. By evening, they reached an abandoned igloo. The redstone lamp inside still worked. Cole blocked the entrance with packed ice. June searched the small room for food and found a trapdoor beneath the carpet. The ladder led to a hidden basement. There was no brewing stand or trapped villager below. The basement held 6 beds, a row of empty chests and walls covered with signs. Each sign showed the same warning. "Do not answer Steve." One chest contained a written book. Its author was a player named Bran. He had lived in the snow village years before Steve and his friends arrived. Bran wrote that his group found a wounded player in a cave under the mountain. The player wore Steve's skin and begged them to help him. His arms were thin, his face was hidden, and black lines spread from his chest. They brought him into the village. During the first night, he began copying their voices. During the second, he grew taller. During the third, he crawled out through a window no normal player could fit through. After that, people vanished. Bran called it the Tall Steve because no one knew its true name. His last pages listed rules. One older note used another name, the Mimisser. Bran wrote that the name fit because the creature stole voices, faces, and habits until fear could no longer tell the copy from the real person. Watch it whenever it is near. Use snowballs to find it when it vanishes. Do not follow a familiar voice. It can crawl through one block. Water forces it to show itself. Fire hurts the black growth, but not the body inside. The final rule had been written in larger letters. Never let it see where you sleep. June closed the book. It watched our beds for weeks. Cole looked at the ceiling, maybe longer. Steve read Bran's final entry. The remaining villagers had trapped the creature inside the mountain watchtower. They used water, fire, and iron doors. Bran did not write whether the trap worked. He only marked the tower on a map. The mark stood beside the same river Steve's group had followed. June spread both maps on the floor. The abandoned watchtower lay between them and the plains. If Bran's trap had failed, the creature might have lived beneath the village ever since. If part of the trap remained, it might give them a way to stop it. Cole wanted to keep moving. Then someone knocked on the packed ice above. "Steve," June's voice called. "I found the tower." The real June stood beside the ladder. The voice knocked again. "Come up." The tall Steve had followed them through the storm. They turned off the basement lamp. No one answered. A long hand scratched across the igloo floor. Ice blocks broke one by one. The creature searched the room above, then went still. Cole held Bran's book against his chest. Steve watched the ladder. Minutes passed. A soft voice came from the bed behind them. It is gone, Cole said. Steve turned. Cole's mouth had not moved. The voice came from inside the mattress. The tall Steve had pushed one black finger through a crack in the wall and hidden it under the bed. The fingertip opened like a small mouth. It is gone, it said again. Steve drove his torch into the mattress. The wool caught fire. The finger pulled away, and the whole wall shook. June threw snowballs up the ladder. One stopped in the air above the floor. "There!" she shouted. The tall Steve appeared as the snow broke across its chest. It had become invisible and entered through the trapdoor. Its body filled the ladder shaft. Cole opened the brewing room's iron door. Steve and June ran inside. Cole followed and hit the button. The tall Steve struck the closing door. One arm came through before the iron sealed. The arm crawled across the floor by itself, dragging the creature's shoulder against the wall. Its fingers reached Bran's book in Cole's hand. Cole let go. The creature pulled the book into the other room. Steve heard pages turning. Then the tall Steve laughed in Bran's voice. The iron door bent inward. They broke through the back of the brewing room, climbed a dirt shaft, and escaped under the igloo. Fire spread from the mattress to the signs. The last thing Steve saw through the smoke was the tall Steve reading the rules about how to fight it. They traveled through the rest of the night. The storm cleared near dawn. The river left the forest and entered a steep canyon. High on the mountain stood Bran's watchtower. Its roof was gone. Half the walls had fallen. A narrow bridge connected it to a mining camp on the next peak. Below the tower, the frozen river passed through a dark opening in the mountain. Cole checked the map. That tunnel leads under our village. The tall Steve's tunnels connected the igloo, the watchtower, and every place along the river. They had not been running away from its home. They had been moving deeper into it. Steve saw blue wool tied to a fence on the tower. The cloth was new. It matched his shirt. June studied the slopes. "It wants us up there." "Then we should go the other way," Cole said. A player stood on the bridge above them. It looked exactly like Steve. Normal height, normal arms, normal face. It held a diamond sword and wore Steve's missing shield from the first night. From this distance, there was no smile. The copy waved. "Cole," it called in Steve's voice. "June and I are already inside." The real Steve stood between them. Cole raised his crossbow. The copy lowered its sword and looked afraid. "Do not listen to him," it said. "He is the tall Steve." June looked from one Steve to the other. The copy began listing memories. It named the first house they built, the place they found diamonds, the joke Cole made when a creeper destroyed the farm. Every detail was true. It had heard them talking beneath the village. Then it said something only Steve and June knew. "The emerald is under the bell." June's face changed. Months earlier, she and Steve had hidden an emerald block beneath the village bell as a surprise for Cole. They had never told anyone. The creature had watched them bury it. Cole aimed at the real Steve. "Put your sword down," he said. Steve obeyed. "It wants us to fight." The copy smiled, but the mouth remained normal. "That is what it would say," it answered. June stepped between Cole and Steve. She pulled a snowball from her pack and threw it at the copy. The snowball broke against its chest. Nothing strange happened. Then she threw one at the empty space above its head. The snowball struck a face 3 blocks higher. The normal Steve was only a skin hanging across the front of the tall Steve's body. It unfolded like a banner. Long arms opened behind it. The real smile appeared above the copied head. Cole fired. The bolt struck one pale eye. The creature rushed across the bridge. Each step broke fence posts. Steve grabbed his sword and ran toward the tower while June placed blocks behind them. They reached the door first. Cole hit a lever inside. Iron bars rose from the floor, cutting the bridge in half. The tall Steve struck them and bent 2 bars inward, but the gap was too small for its shoulders. Then its body flattened. Bones folded under the torn shirt. The head turned sideways. It began sliding through the bars, one thin part at a time. Steve poured water across the opening. The creature became solid again and screamed. June threw a fire charge. Black growths on its back caught fire. The tall Steve dropped from the bridge into the canyon. They watched it fall through fog and disappear into the frozen river. Cole closed the tower door. "Is it dead?" Steve looked at Bran's broken trap around them. No. A bell rang in the mining camp across the bridge. The 3 friends turned. A lantern moved between the old buildings. Someone had entered a hut on the far peak. "It fell below us," Cole said. June raised her spyglass. "Then who is that?" The figure came out carrying a lantern. It looked like a villager in a brown robe. Behind it walked another, then another. 6 villagers crossed the camp in a line. Each stopped at the broken end of the bridge and stared toward the watchtower. One raised its head. "Help us," it called in June's voice. The false villagers began building across the gap. They placed spruce planks with perfect speed, 1 block after another. The tall Steve had learned more than voices. It had learned how players crossed danger. Steve fired a flame arrow. It struck the first plank. Fire spread along the bridge, but the false villagers kept building over it. Their robes caught fire. Their faces opened into white smiles. June activated the old dispensers. Arrows filled the gap. 2 figures fell, breaking into wood and dark hair. The others reached the tower wall and started climbing. Cole cut the bridge controls. Pistons pulled the tower end away. 3 false villagers dropped. The last one clung to the stone with black fingers beneath its robe. Steve struck its hand. The shape fell, but June's voice stayed in the wall. "Help us." Dark threads moved through the cracks toward the red stone lines. June burned them with a torch. The tower had been empty for years, yet the parasite still had roots inside it. They crossed to the mining camp using ender pearls. If something lived there, they needed to clear it before repairing the trap. The camp held a smithy, a bunkhouse, and a small rail station leading into the mountain. Snow covered every roof except one. Inside the warm hut, they found the missing horses. 2 stood tied beside the wall. The 3rd stall was empty. The animals shook when Steve entered. Black hairs ran from their leads into a hole behind the furnace. Cole cut them free. June broke the furnace. A stairway descended beneath it. The air below was warm and wet. The stairs reached an underground copy of their snow village. Every house stood taller than the real one. The church roof touched the cave ceiling. The farm grew pale mushrooms instead of wheat. A stone copy of the iron golem stood by the well with arms long enough to reach the ground. The tall Steve had built a village for itself. Steve walked between the empty homes. Lanterns lit as he passed. then went dark behind him. Armor stands filled the houses. Each wore a copied skin made from dyed leather. Steve saw Bran, Silas, June, Cole, and many players he did not know. The largest house held only Steve copies. Rows of armor stands wore blue shirts and purple trousers. Some were normal height, others had long bodies built from fence posts. Their heads showed different faces, as if the creature had practiced until it could copy Steve well enough to stand in daylight. At the end of the room stood an empty frame labeled New Steve. Steve removed the sign and broke it. All the armor stands turned their heads. The door closed. June threw powdered snow across the floor. Invisible footprints appeared between every row. They did not belong to many creatures. Dark roots from the walls had lifted the armor stands and were moving them like puppets. The copies rushed forward. Cole cut the first root with his axe. Steve knocked 2 stands into the wall. June set a redstone torch against a pile of wool shirts. Fire moved across the room. The puppets continued through it, their wooden arms reaching. One copied Steve's voice, "Do not hurt me." Another used "June behind you." A third used Cole, "This one is real." Steve stopped listening. He watched the floor and cut only the roots that left holes in the snow. Without them, the armor stands fell. The fire reached the empty New Steve frame. A scream shook the underground village. The real tall Steve rose from the copied well. It had survived the fall by entering the river tunnel. One arm hung at a bad angle. The burning bolt remained in its eye. It crawled toward the burning house, pulled 3 armor stands into its back, and stood taller. June led the way to the church. An old rail line passed beneath its floor and climbed toward the watchtower. They pushed the horses into a minecart train, broke the powered rail control, and sent the animals up first. The tall Steve reached the station as Cole placed the last cart. Its hand closed around his waist. Steve threw a snowball at the damaged eye. The creature turned. June placed a water bucket over the rail. Water struck the tall Steve and forced black roots from its skin. Cole cut the hand around him and fell into the cart. June powered the rail. The train raced up the mountain. The tall Steve followed on the tunnel ceiling. Its long fingers moved above the carts, keeping pace. Steve fired arrows while Cole placed blocks behind them. Each block slowed it for only a second. The rail passed a deep lava crack. June hit a switch, sending their carts onto the safe line. The tall Steve followed the straight track and crossed over the lava. Steve shot the rail support. The creature and several blocks fell. Fire covered the black roots. The human body inside screamed in a voice that was almost normal. "Please." For one dangerous second, Steve wanted to stop the cart. Then the same voice came from ahead. "Please." The creature had already copied its own victim. The carts reached a lower room in the watchtower. June closed 3 iron gates behind them. They led the horses to the upper bridge and sealed the rail. Below, something climbed out of the lava. It moved slowly now. Fire had damaged the roots, and water dripped from the tunnel. They had time, but not much. Steve looked at the broken trap. "We finish Bran's cage before it reaches us." Inside the watchtower, old redstone lines covered the floors. Dispensers pointed at the bridge. Pistons faced a central chamber lined with obsidian. Bran's group had built a cage strong enough to hold a large mob. Water channels surrounded it, and fire charges waited in the walls. The trap had been used once. Deep claw marks covered the obsidian. One wall had been broken from outside, not inside. Someone had freed the creature. June found a second book in a barrel beneath the stairs. It belonged to Bran's brother, Silas. His notes explained what happened after the trap closed. The tall Steve cried in Bran's voice for 2 days. It begged for food. It said it was cold. It used the voices of missing villagers and promised they were alive below the mountain. On the third night, Silas opened the cage. The creature took him first. Bran sealed the tower and fled to the igloo. The survivors never returned. The tall Steve did not escape through strength. It escaped because it knew which voice could open the door. Steve looked at Cole and June. Whatever we hear, the cage stays shut. They repaired the trap. June replaced broken redstone and filled the dispensers. Cole gathered packed ice and powdered snow from the mountain. Steve rebuilt the bridge rails and placed bells on every wall. If the creature turned invisible, its body would still touch the hanging strings. They found Bran's old plan beneath the cage. The trap used the river inside the mountain. Pistons could open a floodgate. Filling the cage with clear water, fire charges would burn the parasite when it tried to climb out. A final piston would push the whole chamber into a deep pit and seal it with obsidian. It was dangerous, but it could work. The problem was getting the tall Steve inside. Steve volunteered to be the bait. The creature had copied him more than anyone. It followed his voice, his movements, and his skin. June tied a rope from Steve's waist to the tower stairs. Cole hid above the cage with the main lever. At sunset, Steve walked onto the broken bridge. "I know what you are," he shouted into the canyon. His words echoed between the mountains. "You are not Steve. You are a thing that found his shirt." Nothing answered. Steve struck the village bell they had carried from the camp. The sound rolled down the frozen river. A voice came from below. "I was Steve first." The tall Steve climbed over the edge of the bridge. Its fingers appeared first, then the smiling head. The bolt still stood in one eye. Water dripped from its clothes, but no ice covered it. It pulled itself onto the stone and faced Steve. "Come inside," Steve said. The creature copied him. "Come inside." Steve backed toward the cage. The tall Steve took one step. Steve stepped again. The creature matched him. It enjoyed the game. Each time Steve moved, it copied the move with its long body. When Steve raised an arm, the creature raised one higher. When he tilted his head, its neck bent until the head hung upside down. Steve entered the obsidian chamber. The tall Steve stopped at the door. It looked at the water channels. It looked at the dispensers. Bran's book had taught it the rules. The smile slowly closed. Then the creature used June's voice. "Steve, get out. The trap is broken." The real June stayed silent in the wall above. Steve did not move. The creature used Cole. "It knows the plan. Run." Silence. It used the voice from the first night. "I was Steve first." Steve stepped deeper into the cage, then prove it. The tall Steve vanished. Every bell in the tower rang at once. June threw snowballs into the cage. White marks broke across an invisible chest directly in front of Steve. The creature had entered. Cole pulled the lever. Iron doors slammed shut. Water burst from the walls. The tall Steve became visible around Steve, arms closing from both sides. June pulled the rope. Steve flew through a one-block escape hole as a piston sealed it behind him. Fire charges fired into the chamber. The creature struck the obsidian. Black roots tore from its back and reached through the water channels. Each root carried a small mouth. The mouths screamed in the voices of the village. Cole activated the final piston. Nothing happened. The power line was dark. One of the black roots had cut the redstone. The tall Steve forced one hand beneath the iron door. The water slowed as its fingers blocked a channel. Fire burned along its arm, but the body inside kept moving. June jumped down to repair the wire. Steve caught her shoulder. "I will do it." "You are the bait," she said. "Keep it looking at you." She crawled beneath the cage floor with redstone dust. Steve stood at the glass window. The creature pressed its face against the other side. "Look at me," Steve said. The pale eyes fixed on him. The smile opened. For the first time, Steve saw something move behind the teeth. A normal player's face pushed against the dark from inside. It looked old and tired. Black lines covered the cheeks. The lips formed silent words. "Help me." Steve remembered Bran's first entry. They had found a wounded player under the mountain. The parasite had not made a copy from nothing. A person was still trapped inside the stretched body. "Who are you?" Steve asked. The creature answered with all its voices. "Steve." The face behind the teeth shook its head. June connected the wire. The final piston moved. The entire obsidian floor dropped one block. The tall Steve lost its hold. Water pulled it toward the pit. Black roots struck the walls, cutting levers and breaking glass. One root found the space beneath the cage. It wrapped around June's ankle. She shouted. The creature copied the shout at once. Steve crawled under the floor and grabbed her hands. Cole fired through the redstone gap. His bolt cut one black strand, but three more took its place. "Open the water gate," June yelled. "It will flood this level," Cole said. "Do it." Cole pulled Bran's second lever. The river entered the tower. Ice broke above them. A wall of water filled the lower room. Steve held June while the current dragged both toward the pit. The black roots lost their grip, for June was free. Then the tall Steve's hand came through the open floor. It caught June around the waist. Steve held one wrist. The creature held the rest of her. Water pushed between them. June looked at Steve and placed a redstone torch in his hand. "Finish it," she said. The tall Steve pulled her into the cage. Steve tried to follow, but Cole grabbed the rope and hauled him back. The iron door shut. Through the small glass window, Steve saw June strike the creature with her axe. The old face inside the mouth closed its eyes. June raised a fire charge. The blast broke the window. Cole hit the final control. Pistons pushed the burning cage into the pit. Obsidian blocks closed over it, one after another. Water filled every open space. The tower floor shook. Then the bells stopped. Steve lay in the flood with June's redstone torch in his hand. No voice came from below. Cole pulled him toward the upper stairs as the tower began to fall. The river had broken the mountain wall. Stone supports cracked. The bridge dropped into the canyon. They climbed to the roof and used ender pearls to reach the mining camp across the gap. Behind them, Bran's watchtower folded into the mountain. The top vanished first, then the walls slid into the river tunnel. Snow, stone, and ice covered the pit. By sunrise, only part of the village bell remained above the frozen water. Steve and Cole waited for 3 days. They dug around the edge but found no path into the sealed cage. They called June's name and listened. Nothing answered. Cole wanted to believe she had used an ender pearl at the last second. Steve had seen the pearl pouch still tied to her belt when the creature pulled her away. They built a marker beside the river. Steve placed the redstone torch on top. It burned through every night. On the 4th morning, they continued toward the plains. The journey took 5 days. They slept only in open fields where no cave lay below them. They watched each other whenever trees or hills blocked the view. Every night, Steve woke to the memory of June's voice saying, "Finish it." The tall Steve never appeared. They reached the plains village at sunset. It had high walls, 2 iron golems, and no tunnels beneath the houses. The villagers gave them beds in the library. Cole placed bells on the windows. Steve filled every 1-block gap with stone. For a month, nothing followed them. Winter ended, snow melted from the distant hills. Cole began drawing a new map. Steve helped the villagers expand their farms. They never spoke about returning to the mountain, but both kept armor beside their beds. One evening, a wandering trader arrived with 2 llamas. He carried items from the north, spruce saplings, blue ice, and a single redstone torch. Steve recognized the scratch on its handle. It was June's torch from the river marker. "Where did you find this?" he asked. The trader pointed back along the road. He made the villager sound for danger, then lifted one arm high above his head. Tall. Cole closed the village gates. That night, the player list showed 3 names. Steve, Cole, Steve. The second Steve had no connection bars beside the name. Cole stared at the list. It cannot join a world. From the library roof, June's voice answered. It did not join. The lanterns went out. Steve and Cole stood back to back. Bells rang along the windows. Snowballs flew from dispensers and broke against empty shelves. The voice moved across the roof, down the wall, and beneath the floor. "It came with you," June said. Cole looked at Steve. Black lines had appeared on Steve's hand where he had held June over the pit. They had been faint for weeks. Now they moved beneath his skin like thin roots. Steve dropped his sword. The lines climbed his wrist. "Get away from me," he said. Cole did not move. "We can burn it out." Steve's right arm pulled downward for 1 second. The fingers touched the floor even though he stood straight. Pain bent his back. His view rose by half a block, then another. The parasite from the tower had not followed outside. A piece of it had entered Steve when he held June. The bells stopped. Every dark window showed the same reflection. A blue shirt, purple trousers, long arms, a white smile growing behind Steve's face. He grabbed June's redstone torch and pressed the flame against the black marks. Smoke rose from his skin. The hidden roots twisted away from the heat. Steve screamed, but he did not remove the torch. Cole poured water over the wound. Black threads pushed out through Steve's hand. They gathered on the floor, no larger than a spider, and tried to crawl beneath a shelf. Cole trapped them under a glass bottle. The thing inside opened a tiny white mouth. "I was Steve first," it whispered. Cole threw the bottle into the fireplace. The glass cracked. The black threads burned. A scream moved through the village, starting beneath the library and ending beyond the south wall. The second Steve vanished from the player list. Steve's arm returned to normal. The dark lines faded to scars. He survived, but he never again trusted his own reflection. At dawn, he and Cole searched outside the wall. The road was empty. No tall tracks crossed the grass. No blue figure stood between the trees. They found one sign beside the gate. It was made from spruce wood from the north. "Good morning." Below the words, 4 deep lines had been cut through the board. Steve broke the sign and burned every piece. Then he looked toward the bright fields and saw a shadow stretching from the village well. The shadow was 5 blocks tall. No one stood there to make it. The shadow lifted one long arm and waved. From the sealed darkness under the well, Steve's own voice called his name.